I have so many mixed feelings about this one. It's not even funny. Like, on the one hand, I want to tell everyone that I read this so you don't have to. But then on the other hand, there are so many good things in here that I kind of want everyone to read it at the same time. So I don't know. Hey, so editing Adriana popping in just super quick to let you know that though this video is not one that contains like explicit spoilers, I will get into kind of the nitty-gritty of some of the themes and things like that. So I'm not going to talk about exact plot points, but if you don't even want to know anything about the book, then maybe this isn't the video for you, and that's totally okay, but I just wanted to warn you in case that would be an issue. Hey guys, and welcome to my brand spanking new book channel. I am so excited about this, it's not even funny. If you are coming here from my homeschooling channel, then you already know that I really love literature. But just recently, over the last few years, I've kind of started to really get back into reading, especially when I've been reading so much good literature with my kids, and then it just makes me want to read all the things for myself as well. And so I've started off like with the classics and have just been kind of branching out since then. And I'll do other videos on like things that have been my favorites and all that sort of stuff. But this is my very first video on this channel. And so I'm going to be reviewing the book that I have currently been reading. I just finished it a couple of days ago, have had time to process, and that is Wicked. So I am a musical theater nerd. I was in my high school's thespian troupe, was in lots of different shows. I absolutely loved theater, wanted to go to college for it, ended up swerving and having other plans in life, but it all worked out. And so I just really love theater, and especially musical theater. I have not actually seen the show Wicked, so I don't have the show to compare this to. My cat's making all kind of noises. But anyways, my husband has seen the show though, and so I've kind of been bouncing things off of him. It seems like there's a pretty big difference between the book and the show, but we'll get into that more here in just a minute. So anyways, I really wanted to read this book because I love all of the music from Wicked. Wicked is definitely one that is on my list that I want to see before I die. And so I thought that I would go ahead and read the original source material. I wasn't prepared. So really quickly, if you have no idea what Wicked is, the basic premise of it is that it is the backstory for the Wicked Witch of the West, how she became wicked, or at least became known as wicked. It's kind of like everything that happened in her life leading up to the events of the Wizard of Oz, and also all of the events of the Wizard of Oz from her perspective and kind of what was going on with her on the sidelines during all of that. And so, like I said, as I've been kind of comparing notes with my husband who's seen the show, it is very different. So the people who created the show definitely did their own creative stuff with it and went kind of in a different direction than the book did. So you can't really, it seems like to me anyways, you can't really put them in the same category and compare them next to each other, or it's going to be like reading your favorite book and then watching the movie. Like, they're not going to be the same type of thing. And a lot of people might actually like the show version of Wicked better than the book. So I'm actually going to be doing this in two parts because I wanted to make sure that I didn't put any spoilers out there for people who don't want spoilers, but at the same time, I also feel like I need to talk about this book and process it. So video one is going to be just a straight review without any spoilers, kind of talking about different critiques of it, whether they're my own or ones that I've seen that other people have, and kind of answering those, talking about different themes in the book, that sort of thing, overall what I thought of it, my star rating, all of that stuff. And then video number two is going to be more like a sit down and chat with a friend, have some tea type of video where I'm just kind of like talking through all of these things that stuck out in my mind, and there will definitely be spoilers in that one. So if you don't care and this isn't something that you're going to read and you want to hear all of that, then great. Or if you've already read it, then that will be up hopefully within the next couple days after I put this one out. Okay, so some of the biggest critiques that I saw online were actually different than my own personal critiques of the book. So the online critiques that I saw, one of them was that the story was kind of disjointed. People thought that there were lots of elements pulled in and that they maybe didn't really go anywhere, that they were unsure of why certain things were brought up. And honestly, this is one that when I was first reading those, I was still kind of like in the thick of it with the book. And I kind of felt that way too, to be honest. But then as you continue reading, you kind of get elements brought back in, kind of like the threads are slowly but surely being woven together. And by the very end of the book, I didn't actually feel that way anymore. It seemed to me that anything that had been brought up, there was a purpose for it. Sometimes it was talked about later very explicitly. Sometimes it's almost implied. Sometimes it's more like he introduces something just kind of like for the reader to chew on and come to their own conclusions about something. And I know that some of it is actually brought up in subsequent books after Wicked. So I think that there's 3 of them total that are also in the same kind of Wizard of Oz universe. So there's Wicked. And then I think that the second one is called Son of a Witch. Yes. And then the last one is A Lion Among Men. So there are other stories too that kind of, I think, help weave in some of the other things that you might feel are a little bit frayed. For me, I don't know that I'm going to necessarily read those. But at the same time, even without reading those and just with reading Wicked as a standalone, there was so much there to actually get from it. And I didn't feel in the end like the elements didn't go anywhere. Just because things didn't like always get wrapped up in a nice and tidy bow, like it still felt okay to me. The things that didn't kind of get wrapped in that way, I almost liked better without them being very explicitly put out there. So that's just an online critique that I definitely disagree with. Another critique that I saw was that people thought that the book had a lot of pacing issues. For example, there would be kind of gaps in the timeline. Like we would kind of jump forward in time and people didn't feel like there was enough information about the time that we don't have in between the gap. Kind of like their lives were happening just when we were hearing about it and then nothing was happening in between when we weren't hearing about the story. I will say that this one in general, just like it didn't really bother me. I don't know. There are certain books that have pacing issues that I'm like, that didn't really feel right. Lord of the Rings. I do love Lord of the Rings, but at the same time, everyone knows that there's pacing issues with that trilogy. However, with this one, it didn't necessarily feel like a pacing issue to me. For most of the gaps, we actually did get some info on what was happening in that time, and maybe there wasn't as much action during that time, but to me, that's just kind of like life in general. There are times when there's lots of things going on and times when it sort of slows down. It's sort of just like the ebb and flow of life. And actually, one of the gaps I felt like was very, very purposeful in that not a whole lot happened during that gap. And that's something that I'm going to talk about more in the chat video because it's one that could definitely give spoilers and I'm not trying to do that. I feel like I'm so bright. Okay, I'm gonna say that that's right. Let's hope. Okay. The third issue that I'm seeing a lot of online is just that people don't seem to enjoy his particular writing style. I saw one person kind of like ranting on Goodreads about how when you're reading a book, you like to feel like, whoa, I could have never written something that incredible. And that with Wicked, it was kind of the opposite. And she was feeling like I could have written it better than that. So to me, this one is kind of just a matter of like the writer's own personal voice and whether that gels well with what you enjoy reading or what you don't enjoy reading. For me, I feel like I'm a fairly flexible reader. I'm very kind of eclectic in my tastes and I like to read lots of different things. And so while the majority of my favorites so far have been classics that are just like really, really rich, gorgeous literature, I can also read things that aren't and still appreciate them for what they are and for what the author is trying to say in their particular voice. And so that one didn't necessarily bother me either. I totally understand what they mean by that in some parts of the story, but then I will say there were other sections that I felt like were written very beautifully and just like the most perfect words were chosen for that specific thing that was happening. So really his writing just was kind of like varied to me, but it wasn't distracting from the story in any way, shape, or form. And then the final critique that I saw online that is not one of my own personal critiques was that some people felt like the book was preachy. So he's got a lot to say, honestly. Obviously, he's writing this in a fictional world, and yet there are lots and lots of parallels drawn with our own personal world. As we get into talking about the themes here in a bit, you'll see what I mean, but there's a lot of like religion and politics and civil rights types of issues going on. And so I can understand why some people would feel that it was preachy, just because it is kind of covering those topics that maybe we don't always want to hear about, or we don't want to think about when we're trying to go to a fictional place in our minds. But I will say that I actually thought that everything that he said was very poignant for the story, and that it all kind of worked together to create this land of Oz. When we see the Wizard of Oz in the movie, I've never read the original Wizard of Oz, but when we see it in the movie, it's kind of like we're seeing Oz through Dorothy's eyes, right? We're traveling with her. We know nothing about this land other than what we hear from the Munchkins or Glinda the Good or anybody else that we meet along the way. And so we don't know kind of the backdrop that all of this is happening against. And it's like in this book, he's trying to show us all the different layers of society that are building in this specific place in this time. Even though he has some things to say, they're very much all woven in with the themes of the book, and they all feel pertinent to what's happening. And I didn't feel as though he was trying to force me to see things a certain way, but maybe that's just because that's the way that I read it. A lot of the things that might come off preachy to other people, I feel like were things told from Elphaba, yeah, that's her name, were things that were told probably from Elphaba's perspective. And I don't even think that, at least this is how I take it in the book. I don't even think that Gregory Maguire is trying to always say that Elphaba's right, but he does very much present how she views the world and how she sees things. Okay, so editing Adriana here. I have to re-record this entire section on my own personal critiques for Wicked. So really, I just have two main ones, and one of them definitely more so than the other. So first, I'll just get into one that is kind of a smaller one, but it still, for me, affected the story a bit. So I was expecting the relationship between Glinda and Elphaba to feel a lot more robust, just based on what I heard of the music from the show. I didn't feel as much of a connection in the book as what I do when I listen to the music from the show. With what I was expecting, it was just like kind of a letdown. Like I was just waiting on this really uber closeness that I didn't necessarily get. There's definitely a friendship there. I don't know. It just felt a little bit underdeveloped for me, I guess. And even in the context of the book itself. So if I wasn't even going to compare it to the show. Towards the end, how do I want to word this without giving spoilers? So as we're nearing the end, for people to act in certain ways that they did, it just felt like there should have been more of a connection than what we actually saw, I guess would be the best way to word it. Okay, now my actual really big issue that I had with this book. I was unprepared when I picked up the book for what I was going to be reading and the level of discomfort that I would have at certain times with the book. So there was a good bit of adult type of content in the book. However, not the type of content that I would call spice, like people like in their books now, which I'm not somebody who really likes spice in my books. I used to be. I read like all of the 50 Shades of Grey stuff. I'm not into that kind of stuff anymore. But I get it if you like that sort of thing. This was not even that. Most of the adult content in the book felt like it was trying to purposely make us feel uncomfortable. In a little bit, we'll talk about different themes and things like that. And one of them is definitely evil and understanding evil. And a lot of the adult content sort of felt like it was laced with that underlying thread of like evil going through it in many of the sections. Toward the beginning of the book, there's kind of a lot of it with the time dragon, which you don't know who that is right now if you haven't read the book before, but concerning the time dragon, there's a lot of that going on. There's a couple of instances of infidelity at the beginning of the book, and then later on in the book there's that. So if that's not something that you're comfortable with, then you probably wouldn't want to pick it up. But for me, those weren't even the big points that made me go, I am cringing and don't know how much more of this I can read. I'm the type of person that like when I start reading a book, I want to go ahead and finish it. And I'm glad that I did, because there's so much about this book that I absolutely loved. That's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning. Like, I just feel really torn when it comes to this book, but there were things that made me feel uncomfortable. There is also an instance of, I will say, animal love. Not with animals as you would think of them, as we would think of them in our world, but with an animal with a capital A, which is more like a humanoid style of animal, but that still was like very uncomfortable. But that scene was also one of those that's very much laced with evil. I feel like we're supposed to feel uncomfortable with these scenes, but there's certain ones that just took it too far for me, certain descriptions that just took it too far for me, and certain areas where I was like, where is this going? Thankfully, it didn't always go to the level that I thought it might. So if you're gonna pick up the book, I just wanted you to go ahead and be warned about what was in it. Then at least you can make your own informed decision about if you would like to read something that has those elements in it or not. But really, those were my main two issues with the book. So in general, in this book, I felt like there were lots of complexities with the characters and kind of like the overall question of life and the purposes in life. And so with that being said, we'll go ahead and look at some of the themes that are really prevalent throughout Wicked. So first of all, obviously, we're watching the formation of a person. And that is very much kind of like at the forefront of the mind with this book, with it being called Wicked, it being about the Wicked Witch of the West. And then you're seeing her in her life. And so you're looking for it the whole time of, well, what finally causes it? Like, what is it that makes her snap? What is it that makes her wicked? Because that's kind of like what you're expecting throughout the novel. Or why is it that she is seen as wicked? Like, what is it? Why is she the Wicked Witch of the West? And so we're very much kind of tuned in the whole time to watching this formation of a person. And I think that there's also in that a lot of questions too for like what contributes to how we perceive other people, and also what contributes to how we perceive ourselves. That feels also like very prevalent at the top of the conversation in with that formation of a person type of thing. The next theme was religion. There are lots of conversations in there about religion. It's one of the things at the very forefront, like I was talking about, one of those layers of society that he is really kind of focusing on. So in this world, there are pagans who worship the fairy queen Lurline, which, by the way, again, I have not seen the show. I've not heard any of these names pronounced, so I'm just saying them as I think that they are said. So they worship the fairy queen Lurline. There are unionists who worship the unnamed god. So those would kind of be very similar ish to Christians in our world. Elphaba herself is an atheist, so she doesn't believe in any of that at all. But though she is an atheist, I will say that not everybody of importance in the book is an atheist. There are people of high intelligence that are actually unionists. I'm a Christian myself, and Cat, oh my goodness, she's going nuts. But anyway, so I'm a Christian myself, and that wasn't something that I felt put off by at all. I wasn't irritated with the religious conversations and questions throughout the book. I actually found a lot of them very thought-provoking, and I enjoyed it. Besides those two main groups, and then of course Elphaba being an atheist, but it almost seems like she's about the only one. I cannot think of anybody else that we met in the book who was an atheist. Beyond that, we have those who ascribe to like the pleasure faith, and those I think sort of end up being mixed with what's called like TikTokers later. And if you read the book, you'll see why. And I think that was all of them. So we have all of these different explanations, even of the creation of their world going on, all these different ways to think about life, to frame life. There's a lot of kind of wrestling between which of these is true, or do all of them have a piece of the truth and we can look at them all and then find out through that, or is any of it actually true at all? And with Elphaba, there's kind of this other question of, does it even matter in her case for someone like her? And I'll kind of leave that one there. Her father was a unionist and definitely made a lot of mistakes throughout his life and didn't always look at things the way that he probably should have. But even in that, I didn't really see any villainizing of Christianity or of Christians. Elphaba actually was pretty understanding of her father. She still loved him and came to a place of being able to kind of recognize why he did the things that he did. Her mentor, Dr. Dillamond, again, I don't know if I'm saying that right, he was actually also a unionist, and it was kind of like confusing for her because of who he was. She didn't understand how he could also be a unionist at the same time. And so I thought that all of that was just portrayed in a pretty like accurate real world type of light. All right, so the next theme, government and politics. There's a lot of government and politics going on in this book. We see that Oz used to be kind of like a more royalist monarchy type of state, and that eventually it is not that anymore. And so there's kind of like a lot of tension with that and watching the government develop as time goes on in the book and how it changes as well. And I found all of that actually super interesting. The next theme, a huge theme throughout the book, is civil rights. So, like I said before, there's a difference between animals, just like regular animals, like we would think of animals, and animals. They even pronounce it differently. I'm not sure how it is that they would pronounce it, but animals is with a capital A, and those are more of like the humanoid type of animals. So we see a lot of the issues that kind of arise from that, and from looking at an entire group of the population as less than. We get to see kind of the way that people ignore the issue or kind of want to bury their heads in the sand and not think about it. And then we see people who have been ignoring the issue then suddenly confronted with the reality of it and how they kind of process that and handle it or decide not to handle it. So that is actually really, really prevalent and ties in with a lot of stuff in the book. Also in the civil rights vein, we kind of see the quadlings, which is a different group of humans. They're human, also being seen as less than. And we kind of get to see like what happens with their land and their homes for the power and the wealth of others. So civil rights is something that appears a good bit in the book, I think in a good way, like conversations that need to be had. The next really big theme is morality and kind of like the good versus evil type of thing, and even like the origin of evil, the nature of evil, what it even is. These were all really, really good conversations that I loved. So with the whole morality thing, we kind of see this contrast between what is actually moral and good and selfless versus things that might look moral and are kind of more socially acceptable, but aren't necessarily coming from the same place as those things that are actually truly good. And then for what is evil, I actually have a little snippet that I want to read for you guys because it was just so good. It's on page 370 in the book. So in this, Elphaba has been at kind of this strange dinner party, and she's getting ready to leave. And the people that are there aren't actually her friends. And so it says, while editing, I decided that this section is actually too long for me to include the entire quote here, but they're debating back and forth what they all think that evil is. Some think that it's an absence of good. Some think that it is acting on our evil impulses or our evil thoughts, but not the thoughts themselves. Some think that repressing any of your appetites at all is evil. There's all sorts of different theories that pop up, and I am going to go ahead and include the ending with what Elphaba says. The real thing about evil, said the witch at the doorway, isn't any of what you said. You figure out one side of it, the human side, say, and the eternal side goes into shadow, or vice versa. It's like the old saw, what does a dragon in its shell look like? Well, no one can ever tell. For as soon as you break the shell to see, the dragon is no longer in its shell. The real disaster of this inquiry is that it is the nature of evil to be secret. That was just a really thought-provoking section of the book. I've always kind of ascribed to the idea that one of them said, actually, that evil is the absence of good, that good things were created, but then evil is kind of what happens when those good things have been taken and destroyed or treated improperly, and not that evil is some like created thing on its own. So anyways, all of those thoughts were very interesting to me, and so I just really liked that conversation. And it's kind of an ongoing thing throughout the book of kind of like what is wicked, what is evil, and what actually is good. And kind of in that same vein, we see a lot of, at least the book caused me to examine the intentions of the characters a lot. And it was kind of expressly brought up in a couple of places too. Kind of like, what do we tell others that our intentions are? What do we even sometimes tell ourselves that our intentions are? And what are actually the true intentions underneath of why we do the things that we do? The next theme in this book that I want to talk about is family. It's not always shown in a positive light, though I think that a lot of things that are talked about and brought up as far as family in this book can be very real. Unfortunately, I didn't really feel like we got the picture of a great family other than maybe toward the end of the book, one of her old friends from school seeing that family. I think that that's probably the best image of a family in the book that's actually like a healthy one. But even in the midst of kind of dysfunction and disjointedness, we still see the underlying love of a family and a lot of loyalty with family as well throughout the book. Also, just kind of viewing obviously the way that family shapes us, kind of going back to that formation of a person type of theme, understanding them in their brokenness, and also the sadness of passing our brokenness, like as parents, onto our children. So at one point we get a flashback through Elphaba's eyes, but with her actually talking. Normally it's kind of the narrator talking and telling us about Elphaba, but we're kind of still like in her head, like we know the things that she's thinking about and things that she's feeling. Well, during this specific flashback section where like this memory is pulled to the forefront, she is actually talking to us as the narrator. And in this, her father has asked someone for forgiveness that he has wronged and has not been forgiven, which has surprised him because, of course, like I said, he's a unionist, which seems based on Christianity. And in his way of belief, there's forgiveness, right? So to not receive it was kind of like shocking for him. He points to me and says, not to me, but to them all, "Isn't this punishment enough?" Elphaba the girl does not know how to see her father as a broken man. All she knows is that he passes his brokenness on to her. Daily, his habits of loathing and self-loathing cripple her. Daily, she loves him back because she knows no other way. I see myself there, the girl witness, wide-eyed as Dorothy, staring at a world too horrible to comprehend, believing by dint of ignorance and innocence that beneath this unbreakable contract of guilt and blame, there's always an older contract that may bind and release in a more salutary way, a more ancient precedent of ransom, that we may not always be tormented by our shame. Neither Dorothy nor young Elphaba can speak of this, but the belief of it is in both our faces. So kind of piggybacking off of that last one, another theme throughout the book is forgiveness, or in some cases, like that one, a lack thereof. And it shows up in multiple different ways. And then the last theme that I really want to talk about is another of the really big ones. And he says it in one section of the book twice. He says, who is in thrall to whom? So in other words, who's the one that's actually pulling the strings? Who's the one who's actually in power, lining up things in their places to make them happen? There are certain characters who are in power who we can see and realize the effects of what they are doing very easily. One character we get a glimpse of throughout the book as an invisible type of actor. And by the end, you're wondering, like, how much power does this character have? How many strings is this character pulling? And that's one of those situations that I said wasn't actually wrapped up in a nice, tidy bow, and that we're kind of left to draw our own conclusions about that. Though from what I've kind of seen online, I do think that this character is mentioned in other books, at least in Son of a Witch. All right, so that will wrap up our themes. So for my star rating for Wicked, I decided to go ahead and give it 3.5 stars. Honestly, it would have easily been about 4.5 stars if it wasn't for some of the things that I just felt weren't really necessary that were included in it, but overall, I really liked this book. A few of the quotes that I really liked from the book: the more civilized we become, the more horrendous our entertainments. Another good quote: Glinda used her glitter beads, and you used your exotic looks and background. But weren't you just doing the same thing? Trying to maximize what you had in order to get what you wanted? People who claim that they're good, or anyway, better than the rest of us, that you have to be wary of. I think that kind of sums up a lot of what the book has to say. And that is actually where we will be ending this video. So if you are interested in hearing more about Wicked and you want to just sit down for a nice little chat with me, grab a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, then you can go ahead and tune in to video 2. Hopefully, like I said, I will get that uploaded within the next couple of days. And hopefully everything that I say will make sense, because I feel like I'm still kind of trying to process through it all, and maybe the video will be part of me doing that, sort of like book therapy. But I am so glad that you joined me for this video, and I would also really love to hear about what you thought about the book Wicked if you have read it so far, or what you thought about this review, if it makes you want to never read the book. I have no idea. Or if it makes you want to really read the book. I don't know. But anyways, I will catch you guys next time. Bye. I'm too old. I'm old. I'm not like the rest of these booktubers.